So you're a trader and you're interested in scalping? Well, today I'm going to show you a simple system that I use using EasyAlgo that's going to help you scalp like a pro. Let's get right into this. So this is a two-step process using EasyAlgo. What we're going to do first is use the weekly pivots to determine our higher time frame bias. Once we know what that is, we're going to dial into the dailies and look for entries. Let's choose a token that we want to pay attention to. Today we're going to use ENS. As you can see, I've got the ENS chart open in front of me on the 1 hour time frame. So the first step that I want to do is open up some weekly pivots. So I'm going to go to my EasyAlgo Trend-X and I'm going to highlight the weekly pivots. As you can see, these are the 3 yellow lines. You can see the previous 2 weeks as well as the current week that we are currently talking about. As you can see, in the previous 2 weeks, we were below the weekly pivot, so we were looking for shorts in EasyAlgo. So every time we lost this pivot, we were looking for moves lower down. Now we've reached a situation where we have reclaimed the current weekly pivot and we are now floating around the lows. So the best moves take place when we are out of a weekly pivot, not in the weekly pivot. If we're in the weekly pivot, we're actually waiting for direction. We need to see what the price is going to do. So now we're waiting for the next pivot. Let's see how it plays out. So the new week has started, and as you can see, we've got a very tight new weekly pivot forming here. This is also an inside pivot, which could give us a signal that this could be an explosive move coming. Also note how tight this pivot is compared to the previous weeks. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. Okay, these are the type of tight weekly pivots that we look for when we're using EasyAlgo, whether we're looking for longs or we are looking for shorts. Once price breaks the weekly high, that's going to tell us that there's more demand coming in for this token and that we could be getting quite a big move. So what we have now is a price that's in bullish territory because it's above a tight weekly pivot and it's broken the weekly high. So things are now telling us that we can look for longs. So now I'm going to turn off the weekly pivots now that we understand our direction, and now we're going to start looking for entries using the daily pivots. Okay, so we're going to highlight the daily pivots. We're going to take off the weekly pivots. So now we've turned on the daily pivots and we've switched off the weekly pivots because now we have our bias. Now every day of the week we can use the daily pivots to start looking for bullish entries. When we are looking for entries on the daily pivot, there are only 2 places that we're going to look for bullish entries. Number 1 is a retest of the daily pivot highs. And number 2 is a retest of the daily pivot range low. So these are the types of entries that you need to look for on the daily pivot if you have a bullish bias. Once we have broken out of this daily pivot, you can now dial into a much lower time frame. For this example, I'm going to use the 15 minutes and I'm going to show you where we're going to put our stop and how we're going to deal with this trade. You're looking for an entry as it starts breaking the daily pivot. So I've highlighted this entry region here. So once we get that break, we can start laddering into our position. Stop loss options, you want to exit anywhere under the center of the daily pivot, or if you have a bigger risk appetite, you can move it lower to below the daily pivot. For this example, I'm putting my stop loss under the center of the daily pivot. That's going to give me a risk of roughly 1.2%. Savage. So this trade has played out successfully using EasyAlgo. They've teed us up, they've given us a story using the weekly pivots, and now we've got our entry using the daily pivots. EasyAlgo also gives you quite simple take profit zones. For this example, you can see they've given us 2 blue zones for TP zones, and they've given us 2 gray areas as well. So they print out the key levels for you so you don't need to do the work. So this trade is now complete. We've gone past all our TP zones and we've closed the trade. Now we're going to wait for the daily pivots for tomorrow and we're going to see how this one is going to play out. So as you can see, the next day's daily pivot has formed and we currently have support above the daily pivot. This is telling us that we are trending up and this support should be good enough to look for our next scalp. So what I've done here is I've set up an entry for any moves onto this horizontal support, and as far as the stock is concerned, as long as you're above the daily pivot, you should remain bullish. For this example, we've got support just above this region, so if we lose that area, I'm going to look to cut this particular trade. So for this example, we're at 17.27 for a stop loss. So as you can see, this trade has started playing out perfectly. The support above the new daily pivot is holding really well and things are starting to take off. So as you can see, this trade has played out perfectly so far. It's held the support that's above the daily pivot and it's now hitting a couple of the TP zones. So once you've hit your TP zone again for your daily scalp, you can close your trade and now you want to wait for the next daily pivot to form and we want to see if our bias is still trending up. the new daily has formed and it's above the previous days. So using what we've learned at the start of this video, I've set up the two possible entry zones now using the daily pivot. Number one, it's either at the top of the daily pivot, or number two, it's either at the daily pivot range low. Let's see how this plays out. So as you can see, we're getting a reaction at the top of the daily pivot. As the day played out, it took a little bit of time, but we did hit one of the TP zones on EasyAlgo. It was right at the end of the day, but it did push higher. Now we've pushed down and we can see we have our next day's daily pivot and it's still trending bullish. So we're going to look for the same entries once again. Note how tight the new daily pivot is. That could be an indication that we're going to get quite a big move. The narrow pivots represent a trending market and the wider pivots represent a more ranging market. And you can see that in the previous day's action. So now I'm going to set up my two entry locations for today's scalp. Number one is going to be above the daily pivot, and we've got a nice tight daily pivot, so it gives us some breathing room for our stop. So you can place a stop under those lows, or alternatively, you're looking at the daily range low if we dip into that region, and note that it's also tying into the previous day's daily pivot. Savage. As you can see, all TPs have been hit once again using EasyAlgo and just literally trading off a tight daily pivot. So let's see how the next day has played out. We've just hit 3 winning trades using EasyAlgo. Let's see if we can get a 4th one. So we're going to wait for our next daily pivot to form. While we're waiting for the next day's daily pivot to form, you can see the reaction that we got off the daily range low. Look at this little banger. We now have our next day's daily pivot forming, and you can see it is trending up. It's above the previous day's daily pivot. So we're going to apply the same principle again. We're going to look for an entry at the top of the daily pivot, or we're going to look for an entry at the daily range lows. Number one, we're looking for that move at the top of the daily pivot. So when we break above that, we can also put our stop just below the center. And number two, we'll position an entry at the daily range low with a stop just underneath that area. Let's see how this one plays out. So as you can see, we entered off the daily pivot and we had a small move, but EasyAlgo playing out again, giving us a great little scalping trade on a daily time frame. I mean, this is amazing. This is magical. So that's 4 winning trades in a row now using EasyAlgo's system, where we use the weekly pivot and then we dial in on the daily. Let's see if we can get a 5th one now and see what happens. I mean, this is getting crazy. Okay, so we're going to apply the same principle again. I'm going to put my entry at the top of the daily pivot, and I'm going to put my next entry at the daily range lows. So once again, EasyAlgo really keeping things very simple for us and really simple to understand. Let's see how this daily played out. Okay, so as you can see, we've now taken 5 trades using the daily pivots on EasyAlgo. 4 have been successful, 1 popped a little bit and then reversed on us. So if that had popped a little bit, you could have raised your stop there, for example, or alternatively, you would have been stopped out for a relatively low risk move there. We've had 5 trades. Let's try number 6 and see how this one is going to play out. I'm going to put my entry above the daily pivot, and I'm going to put my second entry at the daily pivot range lows. No way, bro. Okay, so as you can see, trade number 6 has started playing out, and the minute it broke the daily, it really took off once again using EasyAlgo, and all TPs have been hit now. That's 5 out of 6 trades, absolutely smashing it. As you will see, this is obviously a great run from ENS, but this is the power that EasyAlgo can give you when you want to start scalping on a daily basis. We've had 5 trades play out of 6. One of them would have been stopped out potentially with 0 risk for yourself. And remember, when we are doing this and we are playing a trending market, as long as we're limiting our risk to the downside, your upside gains can be really big. EasyAlgo actually helps you structure your trades so that when you lose, you actually lose small, and when you win big. Things don't really get much easier than that. You don't really even need any charting skills to use EasyAlgo. It tells you when to get in, it tells you where to get in, and most importantly, it tells you where to exit. What more do you want? EasyAlgo can really assist you in your scalping game. If you are a scalper or you want to learn about scalping, this is where you need to start. If you're interested in EasyAlgo, what you need to do is click the link in the description below and take advantage of the free trial period on offer. We've had 5 out of 6 successful trades. This stuff does work. Take a look at it.
So Dylan, are you really impressed with how this thing scalps?
Yes, I'm blown away. I wish I had time to scalp and sit here all day.